An important step in rendering or visualization is basically what you do after you render everything out. When you finally get your model complete, your scene complete, and you render it, which in this case you could see my scene here. It's an interior scene with a little bird guy that I made, and you can see it rendered out here. So basically it's what you do after this that kind of improves the image, um, that makes it a little more appealing, I guess would be the word, to the viewers. And so in order to edit these afterwards with the most control, we render out channels. So basically what you do is I have a V-Ray lighting channel, V-Ray reflection channel, same with refraction, self-illumination, specular. And this doesn't just have to be V-Ray, this would be any software you want to. These are probably the minimum items you want to extract out in order to manipulate your image and kind of make it more appealing. And the way you do that is if you go to, like, for example, this one, if you go to rendering and rendering setup and then go to render elements, all I did was hit add, and I selected the various elements that my renderer allowed me to export. So you can see that there's tons in here that I could have added to my list, but for the sake of this tutorial, I kept it to kind of the 5 basic that are really useful for both interior and exterior scenes, for engineering, architectural renderings, anything like that. So with that said, what I did was, when it rendered out, as you see here, I simply saved it, holding this down and selecting the Save All Image Channels to separate file. And I saved my images to a location. In this case, I like to use the target file unless I'm doing something that's really high end, or then I would use like the EXR. I would also render out to EXR, and the way the EXR files work, you don't have a lot of power in Photoshop to manipulate them, but they give you a lot of control over overexposure and things like that. And so I would render out both as EXR and TGA, but for the sake of this, I just went to TGA. And so I'm going to jump into Photoshop now and go to File, Scripts, and I'm going to load files into Stack. And basically I just select the images that I want to load into my stack. Hit OK, and then just hit OK there. And what I'll do is I'll pull in all those channels. The alpha I don't care about. What the alpha channel is, it's like alpha transparency. In billboards, basically, if you rendered an exterior scene and you had a sky in it, you could swap that sky out real easy, just because there'd be nothing covering it up, like no elements in the rendering. In 3ds Max that would be covering it up. So this is my final image here. This is after it kind of compiled everything the way it wanted to. And so what I would do is drop that down to the bottom, and I would turn the rest of these channels off. And I'm going to step through them one at a time. So I'm going to turn my main image on, and I'm going to step through each one of these. First thing I got to do is change the blend mode to the blend modes to linear dodge. So I'm going to turn those back on, and I'm going to set them to linear dodge add. And so with that set, now I'm going to go in and just look at them one at a time. So when I turn this on, you can see around the beak a lot more detail comes in. Off, you can see I lose a lot of the specular on the beak there, and I like the tip of the beak having that little specular highlight, so I'm going to keep that on. And then for self-illumination, I'm going to turn that on. And what I'm doing, I'm just turning it off and on to see how it's impacting my scene. And so when I turn it on, I notice that it's brightening up this light right here, and I like that too, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that on. Yeah, that's fine. I'm just going to leave that on. And then for refraction, I'm going to turn that on. What that did is that basically washed out my entire window. So if I want that, I want to reduce, it washed out all the detail in my window. If I want that, I want to reduce the value. So I'm going to reduce it down to, say, 20%. That looks good. For reflection, I'm going to turn that on, and whoa, that's definitely brightens up a lot. It brightens up the beak here and here. You can see when I do that a lot more than I like. I don't want all that brightness, but I do like the details, so I'm going to set that to something like 20 as well. So 20%, whoops. Yeah, I like that. 20% looks pretty good. And then I'll go to V-Ray lighting, the last one. It definitely washes out my entire scene, so I'm going to drop that down to something really low. 5, perhaps. There we go. So with all those set, basically I'm going to combine all of them using Control-Shift-E. I'm going to turn these off. And then you can see the difference when I turn on my original and then I turn this on. You can see the difference in my scene. So you can see it's adding some improvements to my scene that I think are worthwhile. And the last thing you could do is just come in and start playing with the the adjustment layers. So you do just a new adjustment layer, brightness, contrast. And you just hold down Alt. You can click in between these. It'll pin it just to that top layer, and you can tweak the brightness and contrast just to do what you want. In this case, I'm creating somewhat of a curve. Or you could just hit the auto button. Sometimes that produces good results. I don't like it, so I'm going to go back to what I did. There to there. I probably don't need it, but I'm just going to go ahead and leave it. I'm going to come in with another adjustment layer, and I will add the level. Hit OK. Again, hold down Alt, click between the two layers. It just connects it to this one. And so I'm just going to slide this down, kind of get rid of the spikes at the end, and slide this around till again, I'm just looking for results that I like. You could do whatever you want. There's no magic to this. It's just using your eyeball to get something that, put your kind of personality into the art or the work that you're doing. And then I might add a curve in it. Hit OK. You can see it's just a typical curve. So what I'll do is kind of drop that down. Here's the typical S curve. This direction, and then here's the typical S curve. That direction, they both do different things. Increase brightness and contrast basically is what they're doing. So I kind of like something like that. Just very light. You can see that I'm making very light, minimal changes to the entire thing, which in the end, it's up to you if you want to do this or not. A lot of times it's not really necessary, but I tend to do it on almost everything I'm doing. And one powerful reason for this step is that when I do this, I often discover mistakes in my renderings or objects. Like, for example, this bird has a little bit of fur coming out of his eyes right here, and something going on in between. And so typically I would go back and correct that. But this is just for a tutorial. But if this were a real rendering, I would definitely want to go in and fix these mistakes, re-render, and come back in and fix, do the post-production stuff again. So finally, what I might do is clip these limits to something that I like. So maybe something like that. Image crop. This is going to destroy my image, so you don't really, it's not really going to destroy it, it's just going to crop it and lose all the detail outside. So you don't really want to do that unless you're finally done. And that's it. Thanks, guys.